Old Government House is a manor house slash villa located on the grounds of today's Queensland University of Technology and backs onto the Botanic Gardens of Queensland. While today acts as a local tourist attraction slash museum and exhibition space, it acted as the main hub of the colonial governments of Brisbane in the 19th and 20th centuries. The site is located on the original custodian lands and territory of the Turrbal and Yugara, where the colonial powers opened a penal colony in the 1820s. In the 1840s, the land, that time under the governorship of New South Wales, was officially open to all settlers and no longer just for the convicts, where the government would start dividing up and selling land to the colonialists. In the 1850s, those who were already located in the region and who had significant political sway were growing angry at the government of New South Wales and requested an independent colony, which would shortly become what we know today as Queensland. Independence was granted, and work was to begin on a new government house for the new governor of Queensland. Construction on the dedicated building was completed in the 1860s and is actually the very first public building in Brisbane. The choice to build Government House in Brisbane was actually a hugely controversial one at the time, as it had not yet been decided if Brisbane was to be the administrative capital of Queensland, but they went ahead anyway. The building was built to show off the lavish and unrestricted amount of space the Queensland governor thought he was entitled to. It was made up of several large rooms for administrative, public and private functions. The grand architecture of the building, strategically located on the riverfront, was meant to purposefully show itself off to incoming visitors and migrants arriving by ship. This would be $3,000 a month in London. It's worth noting that today, obviously much grander architecture surrounds the place, but at the time Brisbane would have been made up of mostly wooden huts, and this house would have looked extremely big, bold, important, and probably daunting. The architecture and design also reflects the strict social and gender structure under Imperial Britain, with that very much still apparent today in today's aristocracy. Governor's quarters were of course grand, while the public areas were to be more low-key to give the illusion of a more mundane feel, and of course the servants' areas were, basic, as you can imagine them to be. In 1862, shortly after moving in, Governor Bowen and his family hosted a grand ball in celebration of Queen Victoria's birthday. By the way, you'll notice a few places around Brisbane with the name Bowen, dedicated to the first colonial governors of Queensland. Shortly after the ball, Lady Bowen's first daughter was born in the house, and Agnes Bowen is said to be the first person born here. By the late 1860s, the house's kerosene lamps were upgraded and gas lighting was installed. Over the next couple of decades, the Australian-style exterior veranda-style balconies were added, along with several medium-sized extensions to the estate along the way. They also attempted to electrify the house, but it was deemed too expensive at the time when electricity became available. For the first 50 years of its life, 11 governors and their families had resided at Government House to oversee colonial rule, and of course were all men. I always find it such an irony that men were the only ones considered for positions of power when they were all subordinate to a female head of state. Notable guests to have stayed at the house of course include British royalty and aristocracy, the Austrian royal family, other colonial governors and politicians, and famous artists and singers for the entertainment events. Not once, however, have I seen any mentions of them hosting anyone from the original custodians of the land. By the early 1900s, the governors were no longer happy with the quote essential entertainment space at Government House, specifically the lack of a ballroom, and it was decided that the governors would vacate the house and make it the heart of a new Queensland University. The government bought and moved into today's Government House of Queensland and still preside there. Yes, the governor is a state role that still continues to exist around the remnants of the British Empire and Commonwealth today. Monarchies and imperial systems are super duper complex, but here's the gist of how it works in this case. The head of state of the United Kingdom is the monarch. Remnants of the British Empire today is called the Commonwealth, most countries of which still use the British monarch as their head of state. However, federations like Australia have state and federal lawmakers. Governors sort of act like a head of state for their federal state, which means a state parliament will debate and pass laws at state level under the control of a premier. Those laws are then passed over to the governor, who acts on behalf of the monarch to give those laws royal assent. And we're not even talking how it works at federal level yet, but we'll leave that for another day. Today's governor of Queensland is, quote, Her Excellency the Honourable Jeanette Young. After the vacation of the house by the governors, the house hasn't actually been used for very many things. They attempted to demolish the building in the late 60s, but thanks to new heritage legislation at the time, the building was listed and saved. In the 1910s, classes at the newly formed university would take place in the house, and would house a library and lecture rooms. Shortly after, in the 1920s, it was also deemed insufficient as an educational home, as the building could not keep up with the capacity or maintenance of the students and staff. Over the next few decades, faculties would move in and out of the building, and it was being used for classes right up until the 1960s. In the 70s, the National Trust of Australia made the building their headquarters, and would stay there for 30 years until they moved their HQ to Sydney. In the early 2000s, the National Trust of Queensland and the Queensland Government granted custodianship to the Queensland University of Technology. The university would then go on to give it a major restoration and open it up to the public, which happened in 2009. This coincided with the 150-year anniversary of the establishment of Queensland. Today, Old Government House sits pretty much empty amongst the now extensive university grounds. The house is free to visit and doesn't require any tickets, and makes a nice afternoon spot to stop off at, knowing its history. So do head along in the area. It's definitely walking distance from the city centre, and it's right next to the Botanical Gardens. The house is open Tuesday through Friday, 10 AM till 4 PM, and then 10 till 2 on Sundays. They also have a little interactive room on the ground floor, showcasing the 3D render of the building, which you can click through and learn about more on a screen. Thanks for tuning in through another video, everyone, and as always, ciao for now.